Guy Saint-Jacques was Canada's ambassador to China until 2016, just before John McCallum assumed that role. He joins me now. Mr. Saint-Jacques, good to see you again. First, let me ask you how damaging you think Mr. McCallum's comments have been to Canada's relations with China.
Well, I think obviously they have had an impact, but I think that the damage has been limited as soon as Mr. Trudeau asked for the resignation of Mr. McCallum. And as if you have looked at the Chinese media today, especially what was in the Global Times, they were talking about the fact that Mr. McCallum was talking the truth, that all this was a political issue. And therefore, it was important to correct that mistake and to say that, in fact, Mr. McCallum was speaking in a personal capacity, and what he said did not represent the Canadian government position. So with him gone, I think it shows clearly that he was not speaking on behalf of the government.
Yeah, but how hard is it to walk that? As you point out, some people suggest Mr. McCallum maybe was just saying out loud what the Canadian government and the Prime Minister have been saying in private. That may not be the case now, we see with his dismissal. But how hard is it to walk back that narrative? The Chinese have seen it, they've heard it, and if they believe it, how do you convince them it's not the case?
Well, I think we are at the stage where we need a good face-to-face dialogue. So I don't know whether Mrs. Freeland was able to discuss with the Chinese delegation when she was last week in Davos. I assume that maybe some contacts were established between the two delegations. According to what I heard from the Chinese Consul General in Montreal last Thursday, they are clearly expecting Canada to make an effort and to send a delegation. Of course, the Chinese New Year is coming very rapidly. It's taking place on February 5th. And everything will be shut down in Beijing for almost 2 weeks. But I think while the process to name a new ambassador could take some time, maybe the federal government should consider sending a high-level envoy. This could be a former prime minister, maybe the former governor general, Mr. Johnson, who was very well perceived in China. And the goal would be to sit down with the Chinese to listen to their grievances with regard to Mrs. Meng, but also for us to explain that the predicament in which we are, the fact that we need to abide by the terms of the extradition treaty that we have with the United States. So I think this could be done. Another possibly would be for the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, Mrs. Greta Bosenmeyer, to go to Beijing and to convene the National Security and Rule of Law Dialogue, which was created specifically back in 2016 to deal with high-profile consular cases.
Right. I mean, how urgently do you think this needs to happen? You suggest, maybe Mr. Chrétien, maybe Mr. Johnson, maybe the National Security Director. How urgently do you think this needs to happen? Because for a lot of people watching, it feels like this issue's and it's complicated again by Mr. McCallum's comments and his firing, is kind of spinning out of control. A lot of people look at this and say there doesn't seem to be a plan here for how to move forward.
And unfortunately, it will get more complicated this week, in as much as we will receive by Wednesday at the latest the official request for extradition, together with the evidence that has been assembled by the U.S. Department of Justice. And then we have on February 6th another hearing that will take place in Vancouver. And so, but the complication, as I said, is the upcoming Chinese New Year. And therefore, I think we have to plan realistically for meetings that would take place maybe in somewhere around mid-February. But the contacts should be established right away to nail down a date.
Okay. I mean, what, in your view, what's the likelihood that Canada can reset this relationship before there's an outcome, a final determination on the extradition case of Ms. Meng? I guess I'm wondering, won't the Chinese detain those two Canadians being held, and there's word that some others may be held as well, until at the very least they see what happens to Ms. Meng at the end of the day?
Well, you're right. In fact, we are in a period of that could be quite turbulent and for quite some time, unfortunately. And that's why I think it's important to try to establish a dialogue. Frankly, we are in damage control mode because I suspect the extradition request will take some time. The lawyers of Mrs. Meng will want to use all opportunities to try to delay the process. And that's why, on one hand, Canada will have to continue with its campaign to rally international support. I think this took the Chinese by surprise, but it has internationalized the issue, and they will have to think twice before they do something else. But on the other hand, we have to sit down with them and try to restore some kind of dialogue and try again to lower the temperature.
I suppose some would suggest, I mean, you may know China better than anybody else as the most recent Canadian ambassador there. Do you have any interest in returning to your previous post as ambassador to China to help deal with this situation?
Well, of course, if I were to receive a call from someone high in the Canadian hierarchy, I would have to think twice. But in fact, what I would do if I am contacted, I know the names of a few former colleagues, some who would have liked to replace me back in 2016, and when they saw that this was no longer a possibility, retired. But there are a few people who have had experience in China, who speak Mandarin, who know the country and the culture, and who would be good representative of Canada, and I would be very happy to provide those names to whoever would inquire.
Let me finish on, is there a lesson here in the dangers of appointing a politician to a diplomatic post?
Well, for sure, it's a reminder that when you are an ambassador, and especially an ambassador in a senior position, you have to exercise restraint, and you know that you will be called to speak with the media. In fact, we expect our ambassadors to be very active, to have a public diplomacy program in the countries where they are accredited. But of course, you have to make sure that you are using the agreed talking points and that you stay within your mandate. You are not supposed to speculate, especially in a high-profile case that is in front of the court.
All right, Guy Saint-Jacques, as always, a pleasure to get your perspective. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you very much.